Thursday, 31 August 1939, Gleiwitz, Upper Silesia, Germany, 6:45 p.m. The staff of the local radio station in Gleiwitz, just across the border from Poland, are in the middle of their weekday evening broadcast schedule, going about their business as normal, when suddenly, armed intruders in Polish army uniforms storm into the building and start waving guns at everyone. The employees of the station are taken aback and quite confused by these events because why would the Polish army be attacking our radio station? And moreover, why are these Polish soldiers speaking to us in perfect native German? The station manager and his staff are politely rounded up and locked in a room by these ostensibly Polish attackers, who seem more suspiciously German with each passing moment. 2 hours later, after having heard sporadic gunfire outside, a man in an SS uniform enters the room and tells the station staff that they're free to resume their duties, which will include a special government broadcast announcement at 9 p.m. 9 o'clock arrives, and local listeners, still wondering why the station had suddenly gone silent in the middle of its evening broadcast, are greeted with an address from the local SS Obersturmbannführer stating that Polish forces had crossed over the border and staged an unprovoked attack against the Gleiwitz radio station. But have no fear, ladies and gentlemen, because the local SS brigade has defeated this dastardly act of aggression by Poland. Most of the attackers have been killed, but others managed to slip away, and so our brave German forces are pursuing the evildoers back across the border right now as we speak, so that these vile criminals might be brought to justice and punished for this affront against the peace and tranquility of the German people. Throughout that Thursday evening, similar broadcasts were made all across Germany. And so, if you were a German, that is how the start of the Second World War was presented to you, as Germans defending themselves against an act of brazen military aggression on the part of Poland. And of course, it was 100% grade A bullshit from the word go. The supposedly Polish attackers were in fact all SS men, but in order to make the illusion more convincing, they took some ethnically Polish concentration camp inmates, drove them to the radio station, dressed them in Polish army uniforms, shot them dead, and dumped them in various locations in and around the building. See? We weren't lying. If we were lying, why are there all these dead Polish soldiers all over the place? And for good measure, they shot some German inmates too, dressed them up to look like people who worked at the radio station, and dumped those corpses so it would appear like these innocent Germans were just going about their business until the evil Polish attackers came along and murdered everyone in cold blood. And so, among the German populace, up went the hue and cry for vengeance. I mean, what? Are we going to let this atrocity go unpunished? These Poles, they need to pay for this. They can't just cross our border and murder our people and expect no recrimination. We demand action, goddammit. And so, early on the next morning, 1 September 1939, the German invasion of Poland began in earnest, and with the enthusiastic support of the German people. If they'd been told the truth, that they were the ones launching the war of aggression, that they were setting out to wipe Poland off the map because their leaders wanted the territory for themselves, that they were about to slaughter hundreds of thousands of innocent Poles for no more reason than simple conquest, then the war would not have had the support of the German people, or, even more crucially, the German army. Because remember, the Gleiwitz incident was exclusively an SS operation in its conception and a joint operation by the SS and the SD in its execution. The army knew nothing about it. If the German army leadership thought they were being ordered to launch an aggressive war of conquest with no provocation, they may well have refused to carry it out. They may well have moved to depose the National Socialist government, which they still very much had the power to do at that stage. There's a common misconception that the German army was populated with nothing but fanatical pro-Nazis who all totally sparkly-hearted Hitler, but that was never true. The generals who led the army, who were all from the Prussian military aristocracy, they didn't care much for National Socialism, most of them, and they really didn't like having a commander-in-chief who was a former Austrian corporal. So they needed to be conned into going along with this war just as much as the general population did. And the Gleiwitz incident was a major component of that con. And we regularly hear people throwing around the term false flag operation, often with wild abandon, applying it to things that don't remotely warrant the characterization. The term itself originates in traditional maritime law, where it's permitted for a vessel in international waters to fly a flag other than the flag of its true national registry. The reason it's allowed goes back to the days of piracy on the high seas. If you were from some shitty, weak little country and that's the flag you were flying on your ship, then pirates wouldn't hesitate to attack you and take whatever you had. But if you're flying the flag of a strong, powerful country with a kick-ass navy, those same pirates may think twice and opt to just let you go about your business unmolested. Flying a false flag only becomes a breach of international maritime law when you attack somebody with the false flag flying. So when the British and Canadians launched the disastrous Dieppe raid in early 1942, which was the first attempt at a cross-channel invasion, they were flying German naval ensigns right up until they entered the harbor, and the Germans figured out they were being attacked and started firing on all the ships. But the British, being gentlemen and fair players to the last, didn't start firing back until they had taken the time to strike the German flag they were flying and hoist the white ensign of the Royal Navy in its place. But what happens when you have a false flag operation that exists only for domestic political purposes? What happens when you have a government whose entire governing philosophy predicates itself on false flag operations? That is what we're going to talk about tonight. So hit the music, Jim Eagle. And I'm sorry for that mean joke I made about you last time. He doesn't really have syphilis, ladies. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we've just opened up our own tampon factory because there's no business like flow business. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And you already know what we're talking about tonight. Sadly, we have an abundance of examples from which to choose insofar as our current government and the Democrat Party that it represents using false flag tactics to advance their political agenda, to consolidate their power, and to utterly destroy anyone they perceive as being hostile to those ends. But for our purposes tonight, I want to focus on two things in particular. First, the wide-ass open southern border, and second, the barking mad insanity of the CDC eviction moratorium. It's been well known for many decades now that the Democrats view illegal immigration as being politically beneficial for their side. In the past, they have sometimes pretended, sometimes convincingly, but more often not that much, that they really do care about securing the border and making sure that prospective immigrants avail themselves of our lawful immigration system, rather than just hopping a fence or wading across a river or what have you. But they've pretty well dropped the pretense altogether by now, since Biden took office, ever since the corpse of the former segregationist senator stated during the debate last year that if he gets elected, he wants everybody to surge to the border. Direct quote, his own words. Whether he actually meant to say it or whether it's a symptomatic manifestation of his advanced dementia, where the sufferer loses the ability to distinguish between the things they just think in their heads and the things they actually say out loud, the message was nonetheless clear. If I get elected, we are going to shit-can our lawful immigration system. If you want to come live in America, just find a way to get your ass to the southern border, and Uncle Joe will take care of the rest. No need to bother with all those applications and tests and whatnot, because you look like a reliable Democrat voter of the future. So I like the cut of your jib, Jose. You just find yourself a gap in that border wall, and a friendly representative from DHS, the Department of Habitats for Salvadorans, will be with you in no time at all. And before you know it, you'll be living in a tastefully furnished townhome in suburban Nashville, Tennessee, courtesy of the U.S. taxpayer. Wait, hold on. What's that you say? Coronavirus? No. We don't need to know anything about your COVID status. In fact, if you mention it again, I will jam my fingers in my ears and pretend I can't hear you. So since you clearly didn't get the memo, let me explain how this works. That COVID stuff is just a way for us to make life miserable for law-abiding, tax-paying U.S. citizens. We don't actually care about the spread of the virus. We just like having a convenient cudgel to beat people over the head with who are disinclined to comply with our communist-style diktats, or who might pose a political threat to us in the next election. But you, sir, are an illegal alien. That makes you the intrinsic moral superior of any American. In fact, you are more American than any native-born American, even though you were a Guatemalan dirt farmer up until last week. Because the future isn't for those evil white supremacist xenophobes who are always vomiting out that offensive nonsense about a secure border and lawful immigration. The future, on the other hand, is for you, the illegal alien. So you will get no vaccine, you will get no test, you will get only a free plane ticket to a state that's run by Republicans, and I want to make sure you're COVID positive before we put you on that plane. And I want you to make extra sure you infect as many people as possible when you get to your destination, so that I can blame the rising case rate on that state's GOP governor. After all, that guy might be my next opponent in the election, so I need something to hold over his head, and I need you to be a team player here. Wait, now, what's that? Since we're on the subject, you're not COVID positive? Well, I think you're going to need to take a sojourn to this hideously overcrowded detention facility over there, where 3,000 people are sleeping in a space designed for 600, and you damn well better get yourself infected within 72 hours, or we're going to have another conversation about that plane ticket. Comprende, amigo? You know, maybe I'm giving him too much credit when I call these things false flag operations, because it's really not as sophisticated as all that. It has more in common with the kid who starts a brush fire thinking he can go extinguish it himself and be proclaimed a hero in the local paper, except he winds up in the hospital with third-degree burns and destroys an entire neighborhood. I guess if there's a fitting metaphor for the Joe Biden presidency, that's the one I'm going with. But the recurring theme is this. We have a government in Washington right now whose central organizing principle seems to be along the lines of, well, how about if we create a series of crises and we make them so severe that there is no way to ameliorate them except by us, the central government, grabbing even more power? Which brings us neatly along to this eviction moratorium madness. If sprinkling COVID-positive illegal aliens throughout the country, placing no restrictions on their movements, while telling citizens and lawful immigrants they have to lock down and wear masks and show their medical records in order to go to work or buy groceries, if that's a false flag operation, and make no mistake, it is, then the eviction moratorium thing is the mother of all false flags. We may have to invent a new term for it, because false flag may not do it justice. You'll notice, as I'm sure you have, that no justification or rationale for the eviction moratorium is ever offered by its proponents. As usual, we just get spurious appeals to emotion. They try to tug at our heartstrings harder than Jeffrey Toobin tugs his little wiener when he thinks the Zoom call is over and the webcam's turned off. "Oh, we can't let people get thrown out of their homes," shrieks Cori Bush, who, along with the Right Honorable Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, seems to be dictating White House policy these days. And did you ever think you'd see that? Did you ever think you'd see the President of the United States bending over backward to comport his policy and messaging with the deranged rantings of a couple of vapid first-term backbench congresswomen who were born during his third term in the Senate? So let me see if I have this straight. In fact, let's give this hypothetical person the maximal benefit of the doubt that we possibly can. Let's assume this guy or gal lost his or her job last spring through no fault of their own as a direct result of Tony Fauci putting his bony little knee on the neck of the U.S. economy. Let's assume this person has actively, doggedly, persistently tried to find new employment every day for the past year and a half. And depending on the state in which they live, and let's assume they live in a Democrat-run state with all the luxurious welfare safety nets that accompany living in such a place. We know perfectly well that there are millions upon millions of people who are sitting at home laughing their asses off right now because they've been getting paid 120% of their regular wages for the past 18 months to sit at home doing bong loads and watching porn, all the while not having had to pay their rent and being insulated from eviction by federal government decree. And How many stimulus checks have gone out again? Is it 3 or 4? I honestly have lost count. But who cares? It doesn't matter for our present purposes. The point being, our hypothetical bong-load smoking porn connoisseur has been paid massive amounts of money and continues to be paid massive amounts of money in exchange for doing nothing, just for being alive. And Cori Bush wants us to feel empathy for that person? That person has no ability to start paying their rent? Because where did all the stimulus money go? Where did all the lavish unemployment checks go? I'll tell you what, if you paid me 120% of my normal income, plus 3 or 4 stimulus checks, and I got a 1.5 year long reprieve from paying my rent, I would have 1.5 metric shit tons of money saved up right now. Hell, I would probably have enough to buy that Caribbean island where Epstein and Bill Clinton and the Duke of York banged all those teenagers. Allegedly. So if you're a landlord, tough shit. Haven't you heard? All property owners are filthy rich plutocrats who take baths in gold coins just like Scrooge McDuck. Housing is a human right, says Cori Bush and AOC and the rest of the Washington, D.C. communist chorus as they go home accompanied by their private security details to their Tony multi-million-dollar condos in Georgetown. What? You thought you had rights as a property owner? How quaint. Nope, you don't have any rights. Your only right is to watch your deadbeat tenants trash your rental unit and buy several fancy new cars with their stimulus and unemployment money, which also came out of your pocket naturally. Oh, what's that you say? You've been taking a loss for 18 months, making your mortgage payments on that building while collecting no rent, and you'll be in foreclosure if someone doesn't put a stop to this bullshit? Cry me a river, Mr. Richie Rich. If you own a rental property, you are wealthy. And you obviously have unlimited reserves of cash. So stop being such a heartless bastard and thinking you have the right to throw people out on the street just because they've missed their last 19 rent payments. I mean, what kind of monster are you? But as horrifying as it is, when you live in a world where idiotic 30-something drama queens are the ones dictating federal government policy, this is exactly what you get. And who knows? It's entirely possible that people like Bush and AOC really are stupid enough to believe the things they say. But the people who are running the Biden administration, the people whose identities we still don't know, for them, I think this is all going perfectly to plan. The radical neo-communist left, they run everything now. There is no opposition from moderate Democrats because what? You want me to say something that might make Twitter angry? Yeah, right. And here's where the false flag comes in. Just as our border security agencies are being run by people who think borders ought not to exist, just as, bizarrely, a public health advisory body like the CDC somehow inexplicably possesses the authority to cancel binding contracts between property owners and tenants, and to do so on an indefinite nationwide basis, the vapid backbench congresswomen who are dictating policy to the White House, they are people who are on record as being staunchly opposed to the entire concept of private property, because they are socialists and communists. Socialists and communists believe in collective ownership of the means of production as well as collective ownership of everything else, which of course means government ownership. So here's what's going to happen. When the 1.5 years and counting of unpaid rent causes untold numbers of building owners to get foreclosed because they can't keep up with their mortgage payments with no income coming in. That's when the Cori Bush AOC crowd are going to pounce and demand the nationalization of all rental properties. And sure, you probably think that sounds absurd and inconceivable. But a lot of things have happened since the spring of 2020 that we once thought sounded absurd and inconceivable. These people smell blood in the water. They see an opportunity to advance their dream of turning the United States into a soft communist utopia where the central government is everybody's boss and everybody's landlord. And through our own apathy and inattention, through our naive willingness to ascribe good intentions to people who have no good intentions of which to speak, we have allowed them to get at least halfway down that road already. And will we wake up before it's too late? I hope we do. I'll leave that question hanging. I would love to hear anyone's thoughts, who has any, in the comments. In the meantime, please have a delightful and edifying weekend. As long as it's still my lawn, get off my lawn.